Hi, everyone. This is a special Sunday episode of Coffee with the Geek, and with me today is Mandela Schumacher-Hodge, sorry, um, all the way from San Francisco. So we're going coast to coast today. And Mandela has a pretty varied background, starting with education and Teach for America. And she has a master's degree from Loyola Marymount. And she is an EdTech startup founder. And she also founded Tioki, which I was a part of and just found out recently it's no longer. Sad to hear that. But she's also been part of startup, and I'm going to have her really probably start talking a little bit about her experiences with various startup campaigns and what it's like and where we go from there. But you have a really kind of varied background from teaching to entrepreneurship. So this is a really interesting article. So I really want to get right to your work. So Mandela, welcome, and just tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Andrew, for having me. I'm super excited to get this opportunity to chat with you and share a little bit more about my journey up to this point. So as you mentioned, I was a teacher, and I started teaching actually prior to Teach for America in college, where I was volunteering and teaching English and entrepreneurship to day laborers at a campsite in Malibu, where I went to finish my undergrad at Pepperdine University. And then I also taught at a juvenile detention center called Camp Patrick in Malibu, where I was mentoring young men on completing their high school graduation requirements and hopefully making the transition into college or their next professional endeavor. And so that's where I really got the teaching bug. And my next step was actually to join the Peace Corps. And long story short, I was at a nonprofit job fair, and right next door to the Peace Corps booth was a Teach for America booth. And at the time, I didn't know what this organization was, had never heard of it. And as I learned more and more about it, it really seemed to align to where I was at that time in my life and wanting to make an impact on other people utilizing education first and foremost. And so I joined the program. I started teaching in South Central Los Angeles at a middle school called Bret Harte. It was 2008, and I don't know if anyone recalls, I'm sure you do, but that's when we had the huge economic crisis, and it definitely affected school systems. So I was teaching in Los Angeles Unified School District, LAUSD, and basically we experienced massive budget cuts my very first year teaching. And I was in a system where basically everything works, where it's last in, first out, hiring and firing policy. So myself, because I was a first-year teacher, along with many other first-year teachers, we were actually laid off that first year, and it definitely affected a lot of what I did thereafter. But just to kind of keep the story going, I ended up teaching then went from a district school to a charter school in Pacoima called Bert Corona Charter School, and so I had the great privilege of engaging with a new set of teachers and administrators, students, parents, faculty, and it was an incredible experience. I transitioned from being a general classroom teacher to actually being a lead teacher there, which gave me the opportunity to hire new teachers. And so for the first time ever, I was on the other side of the hiring table, really screening candidates and seeing what it's like to select great talent for our schools from that perspective. And so that definitely gave me some insights into some key problems that I thought were taking place with the current hiring process, which prompted me to participate in an event called Startup Weekend Education. So at the time I was in Los Angeles, but I heard about this event in San Francisco, and so the gentleman who would become my co-founder, we went up to San Francisco, participated in the weekend-long event, and it was my first time really gaining any sort of access to entrepreneurship and technology and the kind of creation a part of it, and it opened my mind to like a whole new world of how to make an impact in education. So that weekend happened, we won first place, and definitely was very excited by the validation we got for the idea. And the idea was to create a teacher hiring platform that incorporated videos and robust digital portfolios, definitely giving teachers more ability to showcase their skills and their talents rather than relying on just like an 8 by 11 inch piece of paper known as a resume. And it also really empowered the school leaders with, again, much more and better information in which they could vet candidates and really select the best ones for their their students, because we all know a teacher is the most impactful factor in a student's trajectory. And so I was telling you, Andrew, before, at the time I was also transitioning into a PhD program. So I was left with a bit of a conundrum in that I had just been exposed to this whole new world of ed tech and education entrepreneurship, which I was really loving. And I was very passionate about the problem that my particular solution was solving. But I had already committed to going into the next chapter, becoming a professor. And my real dream was to educate educators in the future and pedagogy, specifically around critical pedagogy. And so I stayed in my PhD program, and I was building my startup for several months at first. And I really came to a point where I knew that I really had to have a laser-like focus in order to be good at either one. So I was being, good at my PhD program and getting by while I was working on my startup at night. But neither were really making the progress I wanted them to, and the expectation I held myself to. So I knew I had to make a really tough decision. And at the time, I just felt, because I had a great co-founder, a technical person, a lot of interest from school principals and teachers who were excited about using this product, that I felt that this was the right time for me to pursue it. So I made the decision to drop out of my PhD program, built my company for 2 years. We ended up getting funding from K4 Capital, 500 startups. We were admitted into Imagine K-12 Accelerator. And so I actually moved from Los Angeles with my team up to Silicon Valley, and where we built our company for the next year. And then now, obviously, we're talking to me, and I think in my title it says Director of Education Entrepreneurs. So as you can see, I've definitely transitioned on beyond what was called originally Demo Lesson. We changed it to Tioki, and now I'm leading Education Entrepreneurs, which actually is the community that houses Startup Weekend Education, which, if you remember, was that one event that kind of changed my life, where as a teacher I participated in and won the competition along with some fantastic teammates. And so now I have the privilege of kind of helping this community develop around the world. Last year we were in 2 continents, and this year we're in 6 continents, just to kind of give you a picture of how fast we're growing. So it's a real privilege to actually be in this position and really work on empowering and bringing together all sorts of people from different backgrounds with different perspectives on how we can leverage technology and education to improve learning opportunities for all sorts of people. So yeah, that's a little bit of who I am.
That's I think your background and your experience kind of lend itself to my next question, and you're really kind of on the line between business and education. So I think you have a pretty good probably perspective from both sides of the fence. Where is education and technology and business kind of coming together, and where do you see the future of all of those coming together?
Yeah, I think it's a big, powerful question that a lot of people are trying to figure out right
Definitely.
now. So let me put a disclaimer that anything I share is definitely, my opinion and my experiences. And, there's a lot of other perspectives that are really valuable as well and important to this discourse. I would definitely say that in this day and age, things are moving so fast, and the way technology has integrated into our personal lives, our home lives, how my students, when I was teaching 6th grade, every single one of them had a smartphone, whereas they didn't necessarily have the infrastructure at home, though. They didn't necessarily all have computers, or not everyone in their family was literate in the in English language. So I would say that technology is really speeding up people's access to information, and I think as a teacher and my experiences trying to educate students is that it's also changing the way I think the next generation of learners is actually grasping information, retaining information, and how they're using it. And so a lot of the trends we've seen in how technology has expanded is really playing like a key role in how teachers are reevaluating the way they're presenting content, the way they're engaging the students. And so what an important factor, though, that I kind of alluded to in my previous previous comment was this infrastructure piece. There's a lot of work being done on software applications, but I think a key factor in making it all work with education and technology is really thinking about what infrastructure is in place at the majority of public schools, if it is at all, as well as the home, because there's all these new models with flipped classrooms and blended learning that are really wonderful. We see it a lot here at in Silicon Valley with Summit Prep and Rocket Shift, a lot of really innovative ways of what we call school and classroom, but really just thinking a bit further about how we can expand that to the masses. I think a lot of work needs to be done in terms of thinking about the infrastructure that is there or is not there in all communities in the country. So that's kind of my first reaction to the question, but I would say another thing I want to really touch upon is, we are at a point where in the role of a teacher, it's sometimes hard to predict what's going to happen in the next 5-10 years. Is the content we're teaching today, or even the way in which we're teaching it, going to be relevant for the real world skills and application that these students are going to need to actually do? What does college look like in the next decade or so? Is it actually still the 4-year university where you go to a college campus, or is it going to be more the MOOC style? So there's so many shifts going on in this, even the collegiate marketplace, which K through 12 is kind of set up to feed into, that you really do, I think, as educators in the K through 12 system and policymakers and school administrators need to keep kind of a pulse on what's going on in the higher ed markets so that we can make sure, or even, excuse me, I should say higher ed and professional career markets, kind of see where the jobs are going, where they're not going, how technology is changing things, to make sure the content and the methods in which we're enlisting to teach that content is relevant. Because I definitely feel that one of the major frustrations that come about when students are participating in our Startup Weekend education events is this sentiment of frustration that what they were taught is not actually useful. And so in order to make sure education is still of value in this country and is still something people are excited to engage in, we really need to make sure the real world application is there. So a lot of what we do with Startup Weekend education is we give people, everyday people, no matter what they're thinking about or what experiences they had, the opportunity to actually put their ideas into action and see how they can maybe do it differently, but they are coupled with people who have complementary skill sets. So myself, I came in as an educator. I had this problem that I was running into with trying to find great teachers using this massive resume pile. I paired up myself with developers, designers, biz dev people, marketers, all these people who had skill sets at the time I didn't have, and I was able to build a prototype and make my idea come to life. And so I think what's really interesting about business, entrepreneurship, technology, when you pair it up with education, is you can have these pockets of innovation and kind of just testing out different things that could potentially be spread across the country if we prove them correct, etc. But yeah, I know I'm going all over the place, so I'll stop there.
No, that's great. And actually, you've kind of hit on a lot of the questions I was going to ask, so I don't need to ask them. So, thank you for that.
Yeah.
But let me maybe just follow up. And you mentioned the fast pace of technology, and can schools maybe keep up with that pace? And I think we would both agree that it's important that we get there. Hopefully, get our schools there. So let me just give you a crystal ball. And what do you think education or schools are going to look like in, say, 5-10 years down the road?
Oh, wow. I think that we all, even if you look historically at how we think all these different education reform movements and even technologies that have come and they've gone, we've always thought at the time that was going to be the thing that changes it. And I don't by any means claim to have the answer. My experience is my experience. I meet a lot of people who talk about this, so I also have great opportunities to learn from other people who've been working on this for much longer than I have. But I will say that I think a key difference is honestly within education. I think if anything is going to change, if I'm looking in this crystal ball and I would say, what is going to change? I would first say, well, what has to change first in order for anything else to change, I think would be more so of a paradigm shift. I think so much of the way even so you have to think about this. School doesn't just happen. Like people were trained to create schools the way they are right now, right? Administrators went through administration program. Teachers went through teacher training programs, whether at traditional graduate schools of education or alternative schools of education, like I started in, which was Teach for America, and then I finished my teaching credential in a general school of education at LMU. But even if we take it a step back and focus first on how are we preparing the next generation of school creators and educators, I think any shifts that we want to see in education, we actually need to go a step back and not necessarily always just focus our attention on the schools that are currently in existence, but kind of retrain, or it may not even be retrain, but as we are thinking about the next generation of leaders, what kind of models are we giving them to look like? Are we continuing to do the, school is one teacher, 30 students in four walls? That's what school means. Are we showing them different ways schools has been done, whether it's in the United States or in other countries, and kind of giving them some freedom, some autonomy, some space, some confidence to be creative in how they're thinking about educating the future generations. So I don't know if I have an exact answer as to what I think school will look like. From kind of if I will say this, if things keep going the way they are and everyone's still trained in the same models they've always been trained on, I really don't think things are going to shift that much. I think we need to start earlier with the pre-service education programs and changing the way in which we're even talking about education. I will say a second thing, though, that I think will change things in a direction in which they haven't been changed in the past is one of the things I was really passionate about beyond, when I first started Demo Lesson, it was all about creating a really great teacher hiring platform. I didn't speak about this before, but basically we pivoted to Tioki because we really wanted to expand what we were doing in the broader ecosystem. So yes, we still wanted to give teachers a platform with to showcase themselves. We wanted to give school principals an opportunity to find these teachers, but we also wanted to connect like-minded people. We feel like there's all these organizations around the country and around the world that are very passionate about education, innovation, education reform, just improving education, and a lot of times they're more aligned than they may think they are, but they all have different places that they go to congregate and different conferences and different platforms they're using to communicate. So our goal really was to just connect all of these, what we saw at the time, disparate islands of of movements and bring them together so that the people who are of like mind can find each other, communicate, and really build the movement of change. I think it can be very discouraging when you are that one person at your school or maybe a few people who are really rallying for this education innovation, and it can feel very lonely. And I think if we created more spaces where people were given the opportunity to say, wow, you too? Like you think like this too? Like let's come together, because that's really what I got out of my first Startup Week in Education and why I'm so passionate about working on this. Yes, our mission is all about leveraging entrepreneurship and technology to improve education, but in no means is that the only answer to improving education opportunities for everyone. There's many other, but we've kind of created this model where people are physically coming together, connecting and acting, not just talking, but getting into doing the work. And it can make all the difference in how you think thereafter about what's possible and who else is interested in kind of solving this problem. So in summary, Andrew, I haven't answered your question about what I think the future of school is going to look like, but I hope I've touched upon some things that I do think we need to pay a bit more attention to if we want anything truly to change on a large scale.
Actually, your answer brought a lot of thought-provoking ideas to my head, and one of them, and I agree, I think probably that background the education system will probably have to change to meet a different world. And I've heard the complaint in the past, and I've seen a lot of presentations about part of the problem with our education system now. It was really designed for the industrial age, and it was more the factory type, um, setup that was supposed to bring kids to a factory type environment. With, say, innovators today, Google probably being the first that comes to mind, with a whole different type of workspace. And again, I've never been to Google, but I've heard the stories and seen the movies about Google and how they're doing things differently, and how their work setup is to be more innovative, creative, different spaces, light, flexibility. Do you think with businesses kind of adapting that model, it'll lead to a trickle down to education, just by that's what these companies are going to be expecting, is for uh, their employees to come in ready to collaborate, ready to be in a different space, not have to sit at a desk all day? I know that's
Yeah.
kind of a long-winded thought, but do you think that's going to be the driver?
Yeah, I think it's a great point you bring up, and I see it all the time because I have the experience of living out here, going to a lot of events throughout Silicon Valley, Google, Yahoo, Twitter, all sorts of places that are doing business differently. You could say, like a limited paid time off, right? Whereas before it was always 9 to 5, and then you do overtime. That was the normal model, where it's kind of shifting out here. And I have to remind myself that sometimes that I am in a bubble. We are in a bubble out here where there's so much innovation and all these startups all the time, where it hasn't necessarily reached the masses in the other parts of America. So I think that in that sense, we have the benefit of kind of seeing what could be possible for other organizations to adapt. And so, yes, I do think that could be possible for education. And will that kind of affect the way we do education? I would say I hope so, because, I mean, the ultimate question for all of us, and that dictates everything about education, is, what is the purpose of education? Is the purpose to prepare these students for college? Is the purpose to prepare these students for a real world job? Or is the purpose of education to just cultivate the whole human being, right? People have different answers, I think, to these questions, which is why you've seen the charter school movement, right? Where you've seen people do school differently, or you've seen private schools, or all different types of schools popping up, independent schools. I mean, all sorts of things are taking place right now, because people are realizing that their answer to that question, what is the purpose of education, is different. And they feel validated in their answer that it's okay to be different, and we're going to create a space where people who believe what we believe about education will gravitate towards, and they'll want to have their children there, or the students themselves will advocate for their participation in such a school. And so if the public school system is saying that the purpose of education is to prepare students for college, even with the purpose of then preparing them for a real world position, to help the economy continue to flourish, and et cetera. We've all heard kind of this rhetoric in policy speeches and whatnot. If that's the purpose, and we see one of the largest tech, and one of the even the largest but also the most influential tech organizations out there, Google, which you've mentioned, kind of change the way they are even screening for applicants, right? So maybe it's not just a resume. I know Google does all sorts of tests for assessing potential. It's no longer about even what is on your resume, but what potential do you have? How do you think? How do you problem solve? And so I think this definitely needs to be factored in for the K through 12 system, and not just advocating for students to have a certain set of knowledge in certain content areas, but also prepare them to be critical thinkers. How are you analyzing things? And I think, actually, just to kind of tie this into what we're doing, this is a real key skill that I think educators get when they come to our events. It's not, our intention is not to have educators leave the classroom, and that was my personal experience. That is some people's personal experiences, but in no means is that necessarily our goal, is to take educators out of the classroom and to have them start their own ed tech companies and that be the end of it, and that's the way we're going to solve things. But I do think that how you engage, if you engage in entrepreneurship, lean startup methodology, right? Piloting, pivoting, iterating, right? All these things that are part of the culture of startups and entrepreneurship and Google, and you bring that into a classroom setting, you bring that into the way schools are evolving, a lot can change. And so it's not just necessarily the outcome, it's definitely the mindset and the methods, which you're talking about, like Google is really kind of spearheading in that way. And what if we did bring those mindsets and that methodology and that system and that structure into a school setting? Amazing things could happen. And obviously, the question is around alignment. Would our schools be better aligned to the real world? And I would still say, though, I don't know how much of the broader business sector is looking like Google, right? I don't know if their screening process, how much they've evolved over the years, or how much their promotion process has evolved, or if they're breaking people up into project teams, or if they still have a very hierarchical, structure. So I think, though, that the lesson to be learned is for K-12 is absolutely it's important to keep an eye on and keep a pulse on what's going on in the economy, what's going on with the way students are or are not going into four-year universities anymore, what's happening with how some of the top organizations are hiring and what kind of skill sets they're looking for. I do think it's extremely important that if we are going to continue to invest students in their own education, get them excited about it, that it has to be applicable to what they're experiencing or what they will experience in the real world. Because I don't think there's anything more frustrating than having invested your time, your energy in, when we talk about higher ed or even some private institutions, your money into acquiring this degree, if it doesn't necessarily translate into helping you get to where you want to go in the real world.
Wow, lots to think about, but really great stuff. Thank you so much for your thoughts and ideas. And I think for those of us that are going to be partaking in the startup, I think it makes it more exciting to see, just this whole collaboration piece and how, business and education can work together and change the world. But I do have some Speed Geek questions for you. There's 3 of them.
All right.
And I use an app called Decide Now. So I've got them on a little spinning wheel here. Hold on, let me see if I can't. I don't know if you can see it. There, yeah, that's. You can actually see it. You just
awesome.
Put some questions in. So here we go. I'm going to spin the dial. You get 3 of them, and they're just a quick answer.
All right, I'll try.
All right, the first one's kind of an easy one. Mac, PC, or Chromebook?
Mac.
Okay. That would probably be the most preferred one. I'm really liking the Chromebook, though, although I don't have one. Okay, second question is favorite social network?
Oh, Facebook.
Mine too. You can't get away from it, right? It's kind of like my morning newspaper now.
Yeah.
Oh, and our last one is Minecraft or World of Warcraft, or name your favorite game.
Oh my goodness, it has to be World of Warcraft, and I do have to say my best friend works there, so I'm a little biased. And one of our new school models that came from a Startup Weekend education event was based off of World of Warcraft, the gaming structure, and they just launched a new school in Oakland, California this year. So I'm a little biased in that answer.
Cool, that sounds awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Mandela. It was great meeting you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I really look forward to coming to Rochester in a few weeks to facilitate. Yes, I will be there in the flesh. So I would love to continue the conversation with anyone who's interested, and also teaching me what you guys are thinking about and have going on. So more than happy to shine a light on what's going on in Buffalo and Rochester. So
great. We'll be there. It's fun.
Right, awesome.
Bring a warm coat, though.
Oh, I know. I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, so
then
I need to get my winter coats out of the closet.
Yeah, you'll be fine.
All right.
Okay. We'll see you in a couple weeks.
Bye.
Bye.